Love is often spoken of as something spontaneous, something that just happens, something that finds us, as if by magic. But what most people don't realize is that love, in its most powerful form, is not always born from coincidence. Sometimes, love is chosen. It is planted. It is constructed with intent. It is the decision to care, to invest, to nurture, even when no one asked you to. When my mom picked 3 girls to love me, she wasn't responding to a fairy tale moment. She was acting out a vision. She saw a need, and she chose to meet it. Not by words, but through people. That was intentional love. And it changed everything. When you are surrounded by the energy of intentional love, you begin to feel something new. Something unfamiliar, especially if your life has been clouded with pain, rejection, or indifference. It feels like stability. It feels like presence. You feel seen, not because you had to earn someone's attention, but because someone decided you mattered, without you needing to prove it. That alone begins to soften the edges of all the hard stories you've been carrying. Love that is picked, not stumbled upon, has a way of touching the parts of you you didn't know were still hurting. The reason intentional love is so powerful is because it bypasses performance. Most of us are raised to believe that we must earn connection. We try to be good enough, smart enough, quiet enough, brave enough, hoping someone notices, hoping someone stays. And if they don't, we internalize it. We start to think we're missing something essential. But what happens when someone just picks you? Not for what you can do, not for how you look, not for how you behave. They pick you because they see value in your existence alone. That's not random love. That's engineered healing. That's transformational. The first girl my mom introduced into my life wasn't loud. She didn't try to fill every space with attention or praise. She was simply present. That was new for me. I wasn't used to people being around without needing something in return. I kept waiting for the catch, for the moment when she would walk away. But she stayed. She showed up on the days when I was quiet, and on the days when I wasn't at my best. And the more she stayed, the more I began to realize this wasn't about my performance. It was about a commitment someone else had made, not to fix me, but to walk with me. The second girl brought joy. Not the kind of joy that demands attention, but the kind that slips into the room like sunlight through the blinds. She laughed easily. She found reasons to celebrate even the small things. And when I was sitting in dark thoughts, trying to wrestle with feelings I didn't even understand, she didn't try to erase my pain. She just brought light to it. She didn't make my sadness wrong. She just didn't let it own the room. Being around her reminded me that there was still good worth seeing. She helped me notice the moments I would have skipped over. And slowly, I began to reclaim a piece of wonder I thought I'd lost forever. The third girl was strength, not in a forceful way. In a steady, grounding way. She asked questions I didn't want to answer, not to confront me, but to remind me that my thoughts didn't have to stay hidden, that my feelings didn't have to be silenced. She had this way of holding space, not judging what came out, just listening. And when she did speak, it wasn't to give advice. It was to reflect back the strength she saw in me that I hadn't yet seen in myself. And that kind of mirror, that kind of reflection, it's one of the rarest gifts a person can receive. None of these girls were magical. They didn't come into my life with a master plan or a strategy. But what they did carry was the spirit of intentional love. They weren't there by chance. They were chosen. And that act of choosing became the soil where I started to regrow parts of myself. Parts that had been buried under years of silence, shame, and self-doubt. You see, love that is chosen creates an ecosystem of safety. It tells the nervous system, you're okay now. You don't have to be in survival mode anymore. And when your body starts to believe that, your mind starts to open. Your heart starts to thaw. You become more open to new connections, new risks, new versions of yourself. Not because the old pain is gone, but because the new presence makes the pain less loud. There's a deeply embedded idea in the minds of many people that whatever has happened in the past must inevitably define the future. It's a belief system that sneaks in quietly. Through early experiences, through failure, through rejection, through trauma. And once it settles, it begins to build invisible walls around your possibilities. It convinces you that because you were hurt, you will always be hurt. Because you were abandoned, you are unworthy. Because you made mistakes, you are broken. These conclusions become part of your identity. And without realizing it, you start walking through life reinforcing the very narrative that's been weighing you down. But here's the truth that shifts everything. Your past doesn't dictate your emotional future. It might inform it, it might influence it, but it doesn't control it. Not unless you hand it the keys. Pain is real. Disappointment is real. We've all been through things we didn't ask for. Some of us grew up in environments where we were never told we were good enough. Others experience betrayal, loss, or neglect. And when you carry those emotional wounds, they don't just disappear over time. Time doesn't heal everything. Awareness does. Attention does. Intention does. If you don't pause to examine the stories your past has written into you, you will unknowingly carry them into every room, every relationship, and every decision. And yet, what you've lived through does not have to be your final script. You are not a permanent product of temporary pain. You are not frozen in the version of yourself that got hurt. People often think healing means erasing the past. It doesn't. It means changing your relationship with it. It means realizing that what happened to you was part of your story, not the whole of it. Just because something affected you deeply doesn't mean it has to define who you are today. You can feel pain without becoming pain. You can remember trauma without embodying it in every interaction. The moment you begin to understand that your emotions are patterns, not punishments, you start taking your power back. You start recognizing that even though you couldn't choose what happened, you can absolutely choose what happens next. It starts with a decision, and not a loud, dramatic one. Often, it's a quiet, internal shift. The decision to stop letting yesterday speak louder than today. The decision to become more interested in who you're becoming than in who you were when everything fell apart. Because here's what nobody tells you. Becoming emotionally free is not about eliminating negative emotions. It's about no longer being ruled by them. It's about no longer allowing the pain of the past to make your present choices for you. When you carry emotional pain without awareness, you start forming protective identities around it. You become the one who was left, or the one who's always anxious, or the one who never fits in. And you start acting in ways that reinforce those roles, even if they bring suffering. Why? Because they're familiar. Because they feel safe. Even pain can become a comfort zone if it's all you've ever known. But the reality is, those emotional identities are costumes. They are not you. They are the version of you that learned how to survive when you didn't have better tools. Now, imagine what happens when you start giving yourself permission to create new emotional associations. When you decide that sadness doesn't always mean weakness, that fear doesn't mean stop, that loneliness doesn't mean unlovable. You begin to reclaim the space between stimulus and response. You begin to realize that feelings are data, not dictators. And in that space, you discover something extraordinary: the power to respond differently. You might still feel fear, but you choose courage anyway. You might still feel sadness, but you create joy on purpose. You might still remember being left, but you start showing up for yourself with a consistency no one else ever offered you. That's not ignoring your past. It's rewriting the meaning of it, and that meaning is where transformation lives. One of the most important emotional revelations you can have is realizing that no matter how deep the pain, there's still a version of you that exists beyond it. A version that wasn't defined by what you went through. A version that has always existed underneath the noise. And the journey of healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about finally accessing the self you were before the world told you who to be. It's peeling back the layers of defense and pain and false identity, until what's left is raw, real, and rooted in possibility. There will be days when the past feels closer than the future, when old emotions rise and ask to be felt again. That's okay. Feeling them doesn't mean you're regressing. It means you're healing deeper, because the emotional future you're stepping into isn't about never feeling bad again. It's about knowing you're not defined by the bad. It's about being the kind of person who walks forward, even when old voices whisper you shouldn't. You do it anyway. You keep moving. You keep building. You keep choosing. Not because the pain never happened, but because it no longer owns the right to decide what your life becomes. Negative feelings often carry a weight that feels permanent. They can sit on your chest like stones, tighten your throat, cloud your thinking, and make the world seem smaller than it really is. What's worse is that when they arrive, feelings like anger, sadness, fear, shame, or jealousy, we don't just feel them. We often believe them. We believe that feeling afraid means we're weak. That feeling alone means we're unlovable. That feeling overwhelmed means we're failing. But negative feelings are not facts. They are signals. They are messages from within, asking to be heard, not obeyed. They are like emotional weather, passing through, not permanent structures in your identity. And learning how to relate to those feelings instead of being ruled by them is one of the most life-altering skills a person can develop. The problem isn't the feeling itself, it's the way we interpret it. From an early age, many of us are taught to avoid discomfort. Don't cry. Don't be angry. Don't be scared. Put on a brave face. Smile through it. Be strong. And so we learn to bury our emotions instead of listening to them. We learn to judge ourselves for even having them. We internalize the idea that feeling something negative is a sign of failure or weakness, rather than a natural part of being human. But emotions, especially the negative ones, are not mistakes. They are messengers. And when you begin to understand that, the way you relate to your inner world starts to change. Negative emotions show up because something in us needs our attention. Not our judgment, not our punishment, just our presence. When you feel resentment, it may mean a boundary has been crossed. When you feel anxiety, it may be a sign you're too focused on things outside your control. When you feel sadness, it may be grief asking for acknowledgement. These aren't flaws, they're feedback. They're emotional signals saying slow down, tune in, ask yourself what's really going on beneath the surface. But most of us don't do that. We react, we distract, or we suppress. And by doing so, we actually strengthen the negative loop. The more we resist a feeling, the more power it gains. The more we judge it, the longer it lingers. Reframing the way you see your negative feelings starts by allowing them. Not indulging them endlessly, but giving them space. The same way you would sit with a hurting friend, you sit with your own discomfort. You name it. You breathe into it. You ask, what is this emotion trying to tell me? What part of me hasn't been heard? What need is going unmet? This level of emotional awareness isn't about becoming overly sensitive. It's about becoming deeply honest. And in that honesty, you find a kind of internal clarity that doesn't come from denial or control. Once you understand that negative feelings are temporary visitors, not permanent truths, you gain emotional leverage. You start to notice patterns. You see how certain thoughts trigger certain moods. You become less reactive, more responsive. You stop spiraling the moment a bad feeling arises, because you no longer confuse discomfort with danger. You know you can survive a hard feeling without having to run from it, fix it immediately, or let it consume you. This is emotional intelligence at its core. The ability to observe without collapsing, to feel deeply without losing center, to witness your own inner storms without believing they define who you are. You may feel angry, but you are not an angry person. You may feel insecure, but you are not unworthy. You may feel afraid, but you are not helpless. These distinctions are crucial, Because the moment you identify with your emotions, saying I am anxious instead of I feel anxious, you give them more power than they deserve. One of the most empowering things you can do is to turn toward your negative emotions with curiosity instead of judgment. Instead of saying, I shouldn't feel this way, you ask, why might I be feeling this way? Instead of rushing to distract yourself with noise or numbing, you pause and give yourself a moment of real attention. That's what most people are missing: self-attunement. The willingness to stay present with what's happening inside, instead of abandoning yourself emotionally every time things get hard. Negative feelings are also often connected to unprocessed memories, unmet needs, or unresolved experiences. They are echoes of past moments that still carry emotional weight. And by turning toward those feelings with intention, you give yourself the chance to heal old emotional wounds that you may not have even realized were still open. You bring the subconscious into the conscious. You put words where there used to be silence. And in doing so, you loosen the grip those feelings have over your decisions, your relationships, and your self-worth. This is not a quick process. It's not a technique you do once and master forever. It's a practice, a new way of relating to yourself. It means that when sadness arises, you let it speak instead of shoving it down. When anger surges, you let it move through you without turning it into destruction. When fear shows up, you notice it without letting it dictate your choices. You become emotionally self-aware, not because you're trying to get rid of the negative, but because you want to meet it with grace, wisdom, and power. One of the most overlooked truths about personal growth is that the people around you shape the person you become. Not because they tell you who you are directly, but because their energy, their behavior, their presence. These things subtly influence your self-perception, your decisions, and your emotional baseline. Many people go through life surrounded by chaos, criticism, or emotional distance and wonder why they feel anxious, unmotivated, or unloved. They assume something must be wrong with them. But often, the problem is not internal. It's environmental. Your inner world cannot thrive in an environment that constantly drains, belittles, or neglects it. You can want healing all day long, but if you're surrounded by people who feed your doubt and starve your confidence, progress becomes an uphill battle. This is why choosing your inner circle, intentionally and unapologetically, is not selfish. It's essential. People talk about energy like it's some vague, mystical concept, but it's not. It's practical. It's measurable in the way you feel after you spend time with someone. Do you feel uplifted or depleted? Do you feel more yourself or less? Do you feel understood, or do you shrink to fit someone else's comfort zone? These reactions are not trivial. They are data points, giving you insight into whether someone belongs in your space or not. And you have every right to evaluate that data. You have every right to decide what kind of energy is allowed in your presence. Because your energy is your responsibility. You cannot control every circumstance, but you can control what, and who, you allow to shape your emotional environment. Sometimes the people closest to us are not harmful on purpose. They're just operating from their own wounds, their own fears, their own limitations. And that's where things get tricky. Because we excuse the damage. We say, they don't mean it. Or, they've been through a lot. And while that may be true, it doesn't erase the fact that your spirit is being weighed down. It doesn't change the fact that you walk away from those interactions feeling smaller than you were before. The hard truth is, someone can love you and still be bad for your growth. Someone can mean well and still hold you back. Someone can be in your life for years and still not deserve the front row of your emotional world. It is your job, not theirs, to determine who gets to stay in that front row. Choosing your inner circle isn't about surrounding yourself with people who agree with you all the time. It's about surrounding yourself with people who see you clearly, who call you higher, who challenge you with love, and uplift you with truth. It's about building an environment where your healing is not just supported but celebrated, where your voice is not just heard but respected, where your growth doesn't make others uncomfortable. It inspires them to grow too. This is the difference between emotional safety and emotional tolerance. A lot of people are merely tolerated. They're allowed to be themselves, as long as it doesn't disrupt the group dynamic, as long as they don't get too emotional, or too ambitious, or too sensitive. But true belonging happens when you don't have to filter your spirit to fit in, when your full self is welcomed, not just your edited self. There's also a deeper layer to choosing your inner circle. You have to include yourself in it. You can't expect others to treat you with care, honesty, and compassion if you don't first extend those things to yourself. If you're constantly criticizing yourself, ignoring your own needs, or neglecting your boundaries, then you're creating the very environment you're trying to escape from. You become your own saboteur, your own disconnector. This is why self-relationship is not a buzzword. It's foundational. You teach the world how to treat you by how you treat yourself. When you decide to treat yourself like someone worth protecting, worth honoring, worth nurturing, your energy begins to shift, and people who aren't aligned with that energy will either rise to meet it or fall away. Letting go of relationships, habits, or environments that no longer serve you is painful, but not nearly as painful as staying in them and slowly forgetting who you are. It takes courage to choose new energy. To say, I love you, but I can't keep shrinking to maintain this bond. To say, I see your struggle, but I won't sacrifice my peace to carry it for you. That kind of courage is not loud. It's not aggressive. It's grounded. It's rooted in a clear decision. I am responsible for the quality of the energy I allow in my life. And from that decision, everything begins to change. When you surround yourself with people who are growing, who are honest about their pain, but not defined by it, who are learning how to love better, think clearer, and live more fully, you start to reflect those same qualities. You begin to develop emotional resilience, not because life gets easier, but because your environment strengthens you. Because every conversation, every moment of connection, becomes a small act of affirmation. You feel seen in a way that doesn't flatter your ego, but nourishes your spirit. And from that nourishment, you gain the strength to become who you were always meant to be.